All right. That looks good. All right. So this is probably going to be our last recording before we release all of this into the wild. You and I know, are probably going to just keep doing this with some cadence, and we'll talk more about that over time. But this is kind of like the last batch of stuff. And it's probably where we're going to get into the most emergent, because we've kind of hit on all the things that we had captured from the live session. So today is going to be emergence personified. I don't know. Is there anything you're burning to address or to talk about or to riff on to start?
So much. There's so many places we can go. Um, let's start with what we had on our list here. What's the stuff that like fell off on the edges of the last ones
Mhm.
that we want to make sure we addressed everything else. But now, tell me about Jane Goodall.
Okay, yeah, we had written her in the mirror.
Yeah.
Also, like RIP, timely. Pour one out for good old Jane. People have heard me, and I know I did say this probably in the live session. I do think a lot about this is more Jen reflecting on Jen rather than like a complexity informed practice. But I have always felt like Jane Goodall in lots of situations where I feel like I am not of a situation. I'm either observing, and I don't just mean in work, like doing research and observing. I mean just lots of social settings.
Mhm.
And I don't remember when I first landed on it. I was a kid. I was just like, oh, I feel like I'm Jane Goodall among the apes. And then I realized that could be kind of insulting because I was implying the people I was with were apes, and I was like this. That was never the part of it. But
Right.
I bring it up because now that I am grown and more mature and have more perspective, I've started to wonder, why do I still prefer to think about sometimes the way that I am engaged in ethnography light? People will say design ethnography. Why don't I actually use metaphors of ethnography? Anthropological,
That's a good question.
ethnographic metaphors, which is
Hmm.
humans with other humans. Why have I always gravitated towards Jane Goodall among the apes?
Hmm.
And I was really thinking about this like recently, especially, because she died. And I think it has something to do with, it's not the condescension factor, like I'm observing you as objects or test
Hmm.
subjects, but in fact, there's something about the stories of Jane Goodall where she is far enough from the experience of the apes that she can acknowledge and yet still be of them. And I think there's something about that distance, that epistemic distance,
Hmm.
and maybe riding along with it shotgun is like the epistemic humility that I think you have if you are observing another species, rather than lots of things you hear when people are speaking about other ethnographic practices, and it's just you among, some tribe or some other kind
Hmm.
of problematic colonized. No, but the
Go with
the
it.
the very colonizer kind of like ethnographic kind of metaphors that
Hmm.
are found. So I don't know that there's an actual solid answer to this, but this and the surgeon metaphor, which we can also come back to, are these things that just repeat for me when people start talking about complexity and the way that you might engage in participatory or co-design types of practices, and understanding the difference of power over versus power with, designing for, designing with, facilitating, enabling. I just feel like understanding and appreciating that I am a lot further away from other people's experiences than even I can recognize. And so the epistemic humility for me is really key. And I think Jane Goodall represents that because she's not an ape. Again, do away with the notion that there's some hierarchy
Hmm.
to apes. So I don't know. That's it. Like hat
No,
tip, Jane Goodall.
I love that. And I wonder. I'm not deeply entrenched in Jane Goodall's work, but
I'm
did
really
she
not either.
consider apes inferior? I never got the sense that that's how she would have
No, I don't think she
framed it.
did, but I think that the average person, if you
Yeah.
use the metaphor of Jane Goodall among the apes versus, an anthropologist working,
Hmm.
doing ethnographic work in another part of the world,
Right.
the difference would be, well, she was observing apes, versus these people are studying humans. And I think that
Right.
implied thing is there, whether or not you and I would see it that way.
That's fair, but I get the sort of undertone of that, of like she was sort of, she had an affection and a constant curiosity, and
Yeah.
there was something to be learned and appreciated about what she was engaging in. And
Yeah.
so now, would you ever call yourself a people watcher?
Oh yeah. But I feel like it's a weird phrase. So
Yeah,
like it's a hard phrase to say I would have ever used
like,
for
I'm thinking
myself.
like my grandparents. Like my grandfather used to love just like sitting in the hotel lobby when we
Oh
were
my
on
God,
vacation,
yes.
just watching
Airports.
people. I
Airports
love
are
that.
some of my
Yeah,
favorite
same.
places, you know?
Same. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
Everyone
I
else is looking at their phone, and I'm watching everyone else look at their phone because my phone's not
especially
nearly as interesting.
especially now, like the last 10 years or so, where it became ubiquitous that if you look at any line, I almost just said queue, shout out to my British friends. If you look at
Right.
any line of people lined up for anything, everybody's heads down on their phone. I don't remember
Yeah.
when or why, but I remember at some point, like kind of making this conscious choice. I don't want to do that. I want to like be of the world and looking around and like think of all the things you could notice, if you're not on your phone, because they're busy either trying to do something else and multitask, or they're just trying to distract themselves from the boredom of waiting. And
Hmm.
like, what's that quote by whoever it gets attributed to, like over, there's millions of people, but it's like the whole, man's problems stem from the inability to sit alone with one's thoughts. And I just think a situation you might consider boring where you reach your phone is just so rich if you just
Yeah.
take notice and pay attention. And I suspect a lot of people watching or listening who are drawn to either certain types of design practice or complexity adjacent practices probably can identify with some piece of this. And that's the
Yeah.
reason I was like, people watching is just almost too narrow of a phrase. It's just, I
Sure.
like noticing. I just like paying
Yeah.
attention. And I know you do
Yeah.
too. I think probably a lot of people.
Yeah. I think that was Mark Twain. I could be wrong. That was one of the people that he was attributed
Yeah,
to.
there's like millions of versions. So we can
Yeah.
shout out Mark Twain. That's
But
fine. You can have
sure.
credit.
But yeah, like there's this shot that I always envision when, because it's the same thing. Like I'm standing there, you just be still for a moment, and everyone gets nervous and pulls out their phone, and I like watching that
Yeah.
reaction
Hmm.
to quiet and stillness means I need some stimuli. But there's this shot in the Road to Perdition
Mm.
where the kids come into Chicago for the first time, and he's on this crowded street, and everyone has their heads down, and they're kind of plodding along, and he's the one kid in this massive crowd, the one face you can actually make out staring up at the buildings, and just every time that comes back in my head, it's the same idea
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
there's I never really thought about it as sort of an epistemic distance. Maybe that's not the right
Well, they're
way to
separate things.
think about it.
I don't think they're implied hand in hand. But yeah, I think identifying with either Jane Goodall
Hmm.
symbolically or any kind of ethnographic stance
Sure.
is what you're talking about. The noticing, the perspective, sort of taking the paying attention, because everything is interesting if you go into it deep enough, right? Richard Feynman,
Right.
whatever. So like that I think is yes. I think the only reason I mentioned the like distance slash humility piece was because I still would prefer to use the Jane Goodall metaphor than an ethnographic metaphor.
Yeah.
And I had to challenge myself to ask why. And I had to ask myself,
Mm.
is it because I think I'm, quote, better than the people I'm observing, the way that I think a lot of people would interpret a human versus animal hierarchy, which fair point. I mean, I should make too, is like, I believe animals are people. So like, there's a part of my philosophical stance
Right.
on this that negates that altogether, but it's made me wonder why I even feel the way I feel. I don't think there's a hierarchy among species or any flora or fauna at all, for that matter. But that's like probably a
Yeah.
conversation for
That's
future episodes.
another place we can go. Absolutely. All right. Put that sticky down. Yeah.
Yes, I will.
Okay. All right. So yeah, and I never use the ethnographer sort of language. It's not something that I'm particularly
Yeah,
familiar with in a formal way. Is mostly it.
yeah.
But as the people watcher, as the like, I'm
Okay.
just fascinated to see where things.
Question
Yeah.
related to this.
Hmm.
There's also something around being of or being an outsider when
Hmm.
you establish yourself as, in your own mind, I'm watching people. Being a watcher, being a noticer, being an observer automatically puts you in the position of being outside of and watching something else.
Mm-hmm.
is there a sense of being an outsider that accompanies this? You know, when I first had conversations about this with friends, I remember years ago, actually, the very first time I might have used the Jane Goodall comparison was because this person was asking me about how I actually find myself in a lot of communities where I am an outlier. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of the only women, or you know, I'm one of the only young people, or there's something about me that makes me stand out against these other communities that I'm part of. Not like all of them, but I
Right.
remember, you know, this person saying, how do you identify with, how do you feel like you're a member of that community? You're so different than the rest of them. And I said, I don't know. Sometimes I just feel like I'm Jane Goodall. Like I might be of and love, even if I'm not, you know, an older man or a this or that. Or I'm just thinking of all the many communities I'm part of. Studying physics, I
Yeah.
was one of the only women. Playing hockey, I'm one of the only women. You know, things like that. And it's not always gender. Our music
Mm-hmm.
community is, we can
Yep.
talk about,
Yeah.
you know, punk and metal and things. So
Right.
anyway, so that's my question to you, is like, where does being an outsider fit into this, or is it not tied to this? And I say outsider or outlier.
Yeah, and both fits in a yeah, in an anomaly kind of way, I guess. I don't know if I've ever thought of it like that, but honestly, I think it's a baseline. It's kind of a constant assumption of like I need I'm doing the probe sense respond of like I'm trying to assess what this is, if I have any relationship to it whatsoever. And I think because of my own eccentricities, that is a longer process of examining to find that connection. And also, as I've gotten older, that desire to find I'm excited to talk about whatever happens to be the topic of
Yeah.
discussion at the moment, and keep it chill enough that it's not going to like, you know, we're going to dip into politics real quick with a bunch of strangers and end up flipping tables or
I don't
something
keep
like
it
that.
chill. That's not in my wheelhouse.
Well, I can't anymore, and so that's where I kind of just it's more of the reserved observer sort
Yeah.
of role for me to be in, and then afterwards there's a good fun decompression, because
Yeah.
that's where I guess I engage, is in sort of
Yeah.
examining what I just picked up.
It's interesting to think about this. I'd be really curious when we meet again live. For anyone who's listening to this is something I'd actually love to hear about in our live session when we invite people's responses, because
Yeah.
I do wonder about folks who are drawn to very participatory and facilitative practices. And especially if you're working from a systems or complexity kind of oriented practice, like this sense of, like you said, you know, the probe sense respond aspect of understanding what even context and domain and situation you're finding yourself in, but then also you're kind of feeling out, you know, the relational. I almost feel like, again, me with the magnet metaphors, it's like you can feel if you held a magnet and you got close to another strong
Mm-hmm.
magnet, you feel it, you know, literally. So there's a sense of like feeling out without being able to see kind of the relational field. I'm getting into the woo-woo phrases that I know some folks don't love, but I think that's a big part of this. And I wonder, you know, I would like to hear, I'd be very curious to hear how this lands for other folks in this space.
Yeah. The other thing, as you were saying, that occurred to me is, I think it's when the resonance happens, it's immediate. It's almost
Yeah.
there's no like, I'm gonna step back and observe this anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, we met out of nowhere in Boston, essentially. I mean, obviously, Kinevin being the retreat that got us together, but it was like,
Yeah.
all right, complexity, geeking out on this stuff.
Yeah.
Now geeking out on our work in design. How did
Yeah.
we're into technical death metal too? Like, then it just, cool. It took 3 minutes. Is that an
Yeah,
immolation shirt?
it is. But
Yeah,
yeah, it is.
excellent.
It's just what I just put on it.
Old
I didn't
school.
even think about it. I should have changed.
Love it.
um,
No, it's great.
but I think there's like a fit. It's, you know, it goes to that notion of included versus belonging, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
when you kind of drop into a place where you no longer feel like the Jane Goodall and you are now like in it, you're now an
Right.
extended embodied kind of like relational entity. And I mean, again, this can be something that you feel on a deep level with like life partners, but it's also, you just
Mm-hmm.
might find it in a small pocket of people you meet at a conference, or
Yeah.
people at work, or, whatever it is, the other parents on the playground. Like there's going to be the one or two people at the dog park you have two conversations with and you're like, oh yeah, we're on the same
Yeah.
page. So you
Yeah.
do have to respect that. I think people who are in certain lines of work are allowed to be explicit about that, because, if you're in sales, or if you're in customer service, you're in other very
Mhm.
human oriented work, you're allowed to talk about that, even though it's very, esoteric for some, and it's very subjective, but I think in some parts of work, you're not allowed to acknowledge that as like a real and legitimate thing. And a lot of understanding the nature of complex adaptive systems and their behavior in anthrocomplex human versions of complex systems, like that stuff's
Mhm.
very real, very real.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What I kind of heard you say is, and if I'm remembering this right, it's the lighthouse sort of um, uh, uh, range of vision attention versus the high beams. It's the amount of time that we end up in that lighthouse sort of space
Yeah.
versus when you can finally, like, I always say put your hair down. It doesn't work for me anymore, but put your hair down and actually like go to the high beams and just kind of
Yeah.
be, as opposed to trying to see through the fog.
It's going to be our most metaphor packed episode, or hour of them
All
all.
right, we'll have to list them out, or we'll make a bingo
Yeah.
card.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Release it
Speaking
with
of
a bingo card.
metaphors, let me also hit the
Yeah,
surgeon metaphor, because
yeah.
I
Let's
think
go.
I know I mentioned it briefly in the live session, and I promise I will not keep talking about this forever. We might have hit on this in one of the previous recordings, but like hell if I can
Let's
remember.
go. Yeah.
But it's come up a lot lately in other conversations, and the times that I've talked about it have often been when people ask me about how you either sell the work to clients or internal stakeholders, or how you describe the practices. And to not belabor the parts of this I have talked about, it's like when you're going to have surgery and you meet with your surgeon pre-operative, like to have
Mm-hmm.
that appointment, and he will describe, or she will describe, like what they're going to do, but they're not talking to you about, I'm making this kind of incision, I'm using this
Right.
scalpel, I'm doing this grotesque thing to you inside your body. It's high level, trying to put you at ease and helping you understand how what their expertise or their experience or their approach is going to do for you, that empowers you to get back to living and doing and achieving the things you want to do. You as a patient are probably listening for different indicators for you to find trust in. For some people, it's going to be, I want to know this person went to med school, a good med school. It's how many of these surgeries have they done before? I want this person to have done this 10,000 times. But you also don't want your surgeon to say, I have done this surgery 10,000 times. I never deviate. I always follow the exact instructions that I was taught in med school. Because the minute you open the human body, even if it is a surgery that is, well established and has best practices, there we're saying it,
Mm-hmm.
you never know when you open the human body exactly what you're going to see. And so you want that surgeon to not just be someone who is so expert and so experienced, but
Right.
yet not willing to be able to make good judgment on the fly, naturalized decision making, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I have found so much mileage out of this metaphor, and it isn't just surgeon, it's the nature of like operating on the human body. Because I think, and I'd be curious your experience, when people first encounter either complexity science or like Cynefin, the Cynefin framework as a tool, as a method, which is none of those things, I know, but people get real excited about contrasting the three or the four, depending on how they
Yep.
learn. Oh, that's not, that's complex, not complicated. No, and then we've even had some conversations
Mm-hmm.
offline where, we sometimes flip
Mm-hmm.
and treat everything's complex. Yeah, it's not everything's complex. We know
Right.
this, but the
Yep.
majority of the practices and dynamics we're involved in are complex, and we're facing the problem of people assuming they're merely complicated or even ordered. But in reality, like the surgeon domain to me is a perfect metaphor where there are aspects of surgery that are ordered and predictable and need to be. Human safety,
Yep.
health performance, quality outcomes, the means by which, the utensils or the material, is it utensils? They don't use utensils. Maybe but like there are certain
Why
aspects,
not?
the care for
Yeah.
the instruments, the
Right.
protocols that are followed in an OR. But at the same time, the minute something deviates in a way that is not predicted in that ordered way, you
Mm-hmm.
now are looking at a complex system that is going to adapt the people involved, the other nature of whatever is going on in the OR, the details of the human body that is now open on a table. And I just think it's a really rich and generative metaphor. And so I wanted to make sure we chatted about it, and now I've done that. So that when we have our live session, I'd be curious what, if
Yeah.
anything, that unlocks for people who have all the questions about how you talk about this, how you sell it, how you explain to people what you're going to do, and then when you're doing it, how you're doing it. And it's kind of, I think, served well by imagining ourselves as practitioners in that surgeon role, and whether I'm engaging with the patient before the surgery, how I'm dealing with their body during the surgery, and then how I'm engaging with them after surgery is very much like what we do, but not in the way that I could imagine someone who goes, this is an engineering challenge, I'm just going to follow best practice all the way through, and I've followed my, this thinking process, and I'm done. It's much more like a truly, important, like, major surgery, and it can feel life or death to a client, a stakeholder,
Sure.
a team, a company. So anyway, I'm
Yeah.
done with my TED talk about the surgeon metaphor.
I love it. And I imagine that this is a part of it too. Correct me if I'm wrong. But what I like about my dentist that I finally stuck with,
Yeah.
they call it a dental spa. It's not a dentist office.
Okay.
It's
I
very,
like it.
you can get warm blankets and all sorts of fun stuff there.
Yeah, I have often, my husband was just saying this yesterday. He's like, I wonder how often people ask them when you get your x-rays, when they put the big lead thing on you, to leave it
Mhm.
on, because that weighted blanket is so good for
Right.
people who are anxious about dental work. And I'm like, gosh,
Yeah.
anyway, go ahead. Dental
They've got
spa.
a little spa menu when you go in. It's brilliant. Yeah, it's awesome. And so, but right where they've asked the questions about like family history and medication and all that kind of stuff, they ask what kind of relationship do you want to have with whoever's working on you, and like they give a couple examples. Do you want somebody to sort of distract you, leave you alone? You put your headphones in and just kind of zone out, watch TV,
Mhm.
whatever. Do you want somebody that's going to be very communicative through this, talkative? Or do you want somebody that's also going to explain things as they're happening, set expectations, that kind of
Oh,
stuff?
I love that.
That's me. That's definitely my
Yeah.
thing. Like, I'm noticing. So tell me what I'm noticing before I have questions and I can't ask
Yeah.
questions because you've got
Yeah.
your hands in my mouth.
Yeah.
But or is there something else we're not thinking about? Something along those lines. So like it is still contextualizing at a very individual levels, but it's still, they're doing exactly what they're doing, which
Yeah.
is, and I've heard Dave Snowden talk about this too, where you want somebody to be reactive in
Right.
the operating theater, but you
Right.
also want somebody that is managing the inventory of the utensils, instruments, so that nothing gets left and sewn up in there.
Right.
So
Yeah.
like,
That's a good point. He's got such good, there's a couple good talks where he uses that same metaphor.
yep,
I've
yep.
probably just
I go to there are times when you want to design a Starbucks where
yeah.
you are maintaining brand continuity. The operators in that space are there to maintain that continuity, and they're still working in a complex space where
Yeah.
they're troubleshooting and problem solving to maintain within operating limits.
Yeah.
But there are so many physical constraints that say you're not going to deviate from this. We
Yeah.
don't want baristas, we want operators
Yep.
essentially.
Yep.
But then you've got your farm to table kitchen, and even in that space, which is very responsive to, well, what can we get at the market this week? And what are people into that are going to walk in the front door? Where does that end? Who am I as a chef? What kind of team do I have? What
Yeah.
kind of budget? All of those things. How does that all intersect and become a thing? But also, chicken needs to be cooked to temperature, and
Yep.
hygiene needs to be important. And you still need to turn a
Not
profit as a
literally making
business.
it up
All of
as
those
you
things.
go. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's it. There is still a baseline order that makes a lot of that work. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, this is how I go into spaces and talk about like when do we need to represent things as boxes and straight lines versus squiggly lines and weird abstract shapes. And
Yeah.
a lot of the world that we talk about, the service design world that we exist in, those straight boxes, that chronological order to things, that
Yeah.
repetitive pattern, just doesn't represent how so many spaces work.
Yeah.
If you're working on workflows in an app, sure, go to the Starbucks model. But when you're talking about risk managers dealing with an incident, uh, that doesn't work anymore. It is, I want people that are creative and analytical to be able to do what your surgeon's doing. to work within that space, but also not break the law at the same time. So let's follow some of those rules.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is hitting on both. One of the questions I hear so often, whether literally or implied, about, how do you manage and bring people along with the work, right? That's, the part of the metaphor of how you communicate. Do you want me to tell you what I'm doing at every step of the way? Do you want me to keep you distracted and stroke your hair through it? Every client, I think of it in clients, and I know you think as like stakeholders, needs something different. And I like the dentist example where they asked you outright. And I don't, sometimes you can do that. Sometimes in a client or stakeholder scenario, you can literally ask, through whatever pointed questions, how does this partnership need to look and feel to you for it to be successful, for you to feel supported, for the goals of all of this to feel well met? Not your typical, like, what does success look like questions, but some little bit deeper things. And then there are certainly scenarios where you either just can't ask that at all. It's just not something that would be feasible in an organizational setting, or there's not enough safety to even ask some of this. But you can start to, surmise, and you can start to get a feel for it. You ask things, you notice things, you approach that obliquely. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because I do think that is something that folks who are new to wanting to pull these kind of methods into their work struggle with. And this probably goes to something we said earlier, but I would really reinforce those noticing and listening skills, because you can get the answer to what kind of partnership do you need here for you to trust me to do this. You can get the answers to that without asking directly, so I like that.
Yeah.
And of course, I like the rest of the metaphor for the other half of it as well.
Right. Yeah. So what I like about your saying there is that, yes, in a dentist situation, I've been to a lot of dentist office or appointments over the course of as many decades. But so I can kind of say, here's what I think I like. But
Yeah.
how many times have we gone in and talked to a client or a stakeholder and said, what's your change curve look like?
Yeah.
Or what's your
How
tolerance for
collaborative do you
change
want
look
to
like?
be? Sometimes
Right.
we're like, we just want you to go away and come back with an answer. And then it turns out,
Right.
no, they wanted to be involved every
Yeah.
step of the way, or vice versa. Oh my God, we can't wait to collaborate. We're going to be shoulder to shoulder. And then you can't get them to respond to an email,
Exactly. They're exhausted by the collaboration. Or, how much change and disruption do you actually want here? We need to change everything. It's broken. It's all broken.
Yeah.
Excellent. Let's do this. Let's flip this switch and see what happens.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's a sacred cow. Don't
Right.
touch that.
Right.
I'll show you all the sacred cows you can't touch now. And I think that generates a lot of frustration for those of us that think we can just ask that question and go in there. I know that I made that mistake for a long time and was frustrated by it for a long time. And of course, I'm blaming people, because why did you deceive me like this? Why are you not self-aware enough to know? I kind of had to.
Just think the right way about this. Just get into a better mindset,
Right. Yes. Why can't let's just change their mindsets? So but recognizing that that's also not just one thing, that relationship between, I want to change this thing, but not my sacred cows. And everyone's sacred cows are very different. Coming to that really puts you back in that lighthouse sort of moment to say, okay, I have it's the probe sense respond again.
You're at the airport
in
now.
This context, it works.
You're paying attention to everything.
Right.
You don't know which thing is going to be the relevant thing that tells you what people really want or need, but now you're standing for it. Yes.
This is where I think this is a lot of, like, we talk about being translators a lot, but that's this is the level of vigilance, and those are the moments and opportunities for that vigilance that is an important part of being a translator, I think. And I think this is when I started and I'm going into and I'm reading all of these things about complexity and systems and Cynefin and Warm data and everything else, I'm coming in and I'm going, let me regurgitate the information to you, thinking that was the work. I needed to educate them, and then I needed to facilitate these things.
Yeah.
So much more of it was turning that work back on myself and my relationship with people. And I know we talked about this in the live session and in a recording too, like, become the attractor. That was part of the, turn it back on yourself, but also recognize the multiple relationships and contexts that you're interfering with or interacting with in this space, and that it's not going to be one thing that anyone is just going to be able to articulate and then commit to and stick with. And once you've accepted that, you turn these methods back on yourself, and they are really supportive in that way.
Yeah. And I think I'm listening to you, and my mind is running through all the various examples, that I've been through in the years with clients and collaborators. And one of the things I think we mentioned briefly in the live session was that there is fear. It's human. We talked about the tolerance, uncertainty tolerance stuff, but this is another place where I think understanding fear and all the various shades of it is valuable. Not in a way that I want to make everything is all about fear, everything is fear driven, because that's not what I'm saying. But when you are working with someone and your instinct is you wish you could just ask them, what does this need to be? Do you want me to distract you? Do you want me to fill you in at every step of the way? Do you want me to go away and come back with this being done? And then they give you contradictory answers, or they act in contradictory behavioral ways. I, at some point, kind of just recognized most of the time when people say they want one thing, but then they actually act in ways that are going to achieve the opposite, or prevent the thing they want from happening, self-sabotaging, or whatever kind of metaphors you want to use. It's a lot of fear. And I remember there's a framework that is from Robert Keegan, and I think his partner Leahy, I forget her first name, Robin, maybe, but I might just be thinking Robin. It's called the Immunity to Change framework. And I'm not always a big fan of here's a framework, everyone should go with. Right. The Immunity to Change framework, though, regardless of the nuts and bolts of it, because it has its own attendant little process, have people fill out this canvas and think through what is the thing they ultimately want. What are the things that would need to be true for that to happen? What are the things that they do that literally contradict? Sure. It's a self-reflective process, which is valuable. I think that's always good, getting people to interrogate their own assumptions, whatever. Self-reflection. Yeah. We love this. I don't care about the nuts and bolts of the actual framework. The notion of immunity to change, I find powerful, because that metaphor, we're on metaphor number 45 for already. So this is great. The immune system is a protective thing, right? The immune system is good. We all want our immune systems to work well. They protect us against, harmful bacteria and whatever. But we know the immune system can also get out of whack, and it can respond to things that it doesn't need to respond to. And you can also develop autoimmune disorders where it is attacking healthy tissue in your own body. So this metaphor will take you far. And the Immunity to Change framework, when I remember first kind of feeling out that I could use this framework, not follow the process, but just kind of think about it in terms of when I work with people, when they say they want change, when they claim to want change, and they're asking for change and yet behaving in ways that literally contradict that, there is a place where you can ask yourself, they want this thing, but their immune system is fighting it the way an autoimmune disorder would fight. And it can help you point you and the client together at what that actually means. So you have to do the work to unpack the metaphor with your client, but there is something about that I find so elegant and so meaningful. And if anybody's listening to this and actually wants to go look up the framework, feel free. I mean, there's articles all over. There's a whole book about it. It's mentioned briefly in one of their other books about deliberately developmental organizations, which is decent. But largely, I have found it very instructive in my own practice to think about that contradictory and frustrating experience as this person or this team or this entire company wants this thing to happen. It is not them that is literally self-sabotaging. It is this kind of immune system that is fighting the change. And it allows you to extract this notion of the immune system away from the individual peoples, which is what you mentioned. It's you get mad at the people. As I said, people's plural, but you get what I mean. It's not like this individual person is trying to be, territorial or stick in the mud. Sometimes it is literally this just amorphous kind of cultural thing that I think complexity practitioners will find resonant. And that is, I find a useful metaphor. So
I haven't heard that before, and I love it. So add that to the list. I'm going to add to it because my first impression, as I think of when I thought of immune systems from 7th grade health class, it was part of your circulatory system. It was something that was internal,
That's right.
individualized,
Mm-hmm.
and solely sort of isolated from the world, sort of cut off.
Yes, I love where you're going
Obviously
with this.
now, yeah,
Yeah.
now your immune system is absolutely a relationship between your own system and your entire environment.
Yes.
And so that that immune system being respondent to the environment that it's in, the space, the system that it's in, the other people, the permissions that it has, the
Yes.
ability to take risks,
Yep.
the option sets, the level of awareness, all of those sort of things. Again, as complexity practitioners and systems mind folks, whatever, yeah, they should all resonate, because a lot of that frustration I would notice with people, but I would see that they were also frustrated at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
because yes, they wanted change,
Yeah.
and no, they couldn't articulate it, and
Yeah.
no, they couldn't see their way out. And obviously, like, this is where, we come in and we bring our decolonization sort of practice as well, where like people aren't just waiting for us to come by and ask them the question, then deliver something for them. They're not
Yeah.
looking for a savior. If they knew how to get themselves through that change or out of that situation they're trying to
Right.
fix, they would actualize,
Right.
not waiting for any of us. But yeah, I love that that metaphor for that
Yeah.
relational quality as well.
Yeah.
And also, I'm not particularly conscious of what my immune system's doing on a day-to-day
No,
basis. It
that's
just
the
does its
value.
thing.
It honestly
Yeah.
really is far, and I have used the framework. I mean, I have used, the like I said, this little canvas and a little process. I've played with it. I mix it up. I don't use anything like standard
Mm-hmm.
production operating model, but it
Toolbox.
can be
Yeah.
effective in the right context. But it definitely, it is truly the most important aspect of it is simply that it does prompt a little bit of reflection and awareness. That doesn't automatically mean you have that doesn't solve it. That doesn't solve it. It
Right.
doesn't do the work of
Right.
solving it, but it really unlocks immediately, whatever can feel a little locked up, and give people permission to either do or try or pilot or probe or sense or respond things that they
Right.
wouldn't even let themselves do because, again, see previous metaphorical conversation. So yeah, it really is just the awareness, if nothing else.
Yeah, and if we really just wanted people to be self-aware and we could ask them to like mark a thing and be categorized in it, we'd go to like Myers-Briggs and Five Strengths and all the other corporate horoscopes that we could just identify people by, and then we'll bring all of the change. I don't know. Adept people into a room for the net. Obviously, none of that.
Yes, we'll put I'll put the creatives over here. The rest of you are just
exactly. The disruptors. Let's bring us all your disruptors. We'll use them.
I took one recently that was shared with a mutual friend of ours. That is I forget the name of it now. The acronym is KAI, and it's the one that I believe is it innovator versus adapter, or innovation versus adaptation, I think.
I did not take that. I know who you're talking about, and they introduced me to this, and I took a look, and I said, I'm still skeptical, but
I
I'm
did it anyway because I did them all.
curious. Yeah,
We should talk
but I
about
didn't
this.
get access to it, so yeah.
Well, so part of what actually got me with that one. So my results were like exactly what you'd probably expect them to be, but I went into it kind of I didn't spend a lot of time on it. Obviously, I could remember more of the details, but I was actually struck by the words adaptation versus innovation, because I would, in my own conception of those words, I would actually feel like I would expect to like score high on the like adaptation side of things, because I think of adaptation as like evolution. I mean, we've talked, I hear the word learning, I think learning is adaptation, like it is core. And I think this particular framework kind of deals with adaptation more as like adapting to, I don't even know how you can kind of sense what I'm getting at. Like you adapt because you can't innovate, or like instead of coming up with like net new better things, let's just work iteratively from where we are. It's like our compromise or something or whatever. Or like when you think about in climate work, mitigation, adaptation, right? Like these different kind of like stances on how to respond to this climate crisis. So I actually came out of taking it. I kind of deliberately didn't read too much about it, just took the assessment and then came out of it hoping / expecting to score high on adaptation, because my personality is very much learn our way forward. I know that about myself. And yet I came up more on the innovator side, even though historically, if you asked me to come up with a bunch of new ideas for something or to brainstorm a bunch of things from scratch, those are my least favorite activities. I do not like a blank slate. I do not like wild and crazy, let's come up with blue sky things, which is also makes it weird that I ended up in design. But these frameworks are interesting in that way, which, you know, again, that's one of the reasons I can criticize something like the immunity to change framework for all of the ways it gets misapplied and some of its shortcomings and reductionist things. But I like it for exactly the reason we're alluding to, which is it doesn't promote a level of categorizing or explaining. It just gives people a little bit of a lever or prompt to think about where in their own assumptions or their collaboration with others, they are self-sabotaging. And like in the non like therapy speak way, could you just stop doing that? What would it take to stop? And if you can't stop, why? And let's unpack that, you know, and in a professional organizational way, not in a therapy way. And then you can actually unlock some very important, very subtle things. But like, you know, you get to Myers-Briggs, you get to StrengthsFinder, you get to the Big Five, and it's like you can't help, despite everyone always saying, "Oh, let's not use these to categorize." Even my taking of that one this past week had the exact, you know, it did exactly what we would expect it to do, which is like, no, I don't want to be an innovator. I want to be an adapter.
So I'm a little bit of a sidebar, because what was really interesting about what you just said that caught me off guard a little bit was I'm not surprised that you are not into white spaces, and that's not your ideal place to be. What was interesting was that you said that it's interesting that you got into design despite that.
I mean, I just think the image of the designer is like, give me my blank sheet of paper and let me just design this incredibly new thing.
Yeah,
or
the
you and I,
mythology.
we've talked before about making as this like drive for a lot of people who get into design. I might be repeating myself. It's possible we talked about this on a previous recording, so shut me up if I did. But
I don't think so.
I think that, you know, so much about what my understanding of design was when I first was entering this field was so many designers who were like, I'm a maker.
Right.
I got into design because I like to make. I like to see my creation become real, whether it's literally a car or a shoe or a screen or a service or an experience. Like, even if it's not physically tangible, it's still this implied something didn't exist and now it exists because of me. And I completely understand that. Don't feel it. Like, real talk to the world. And I have shared this in other places. Like, I'm sure I think I've said this on a couple podcast interviews or whatever. So this is not my first time, but it's like, it feels like admitting something like sacrilegious that I do not fucking care about making. I do not care if anything I put in the world remains. I don't care if my name is attached to it. I do not feel a drive to leave a mark. Now, I also think that there's a lot there that is like biological, evolutionary. We have the drive to reproduce. People want to have children. Side note, I don't have kids. I never felt the drive to have kids. We're getting very personal. But this is, I think, all linked up. And one day, a year or two, or well, at this point, probably a couple more years ago, someone close to me challenged me on this. And they were like, you do leave a mark. It's invisible and it's learning and it's part of when you were teaching and it's part of what you do now in your work. And I was just like, shut up. You've ruined the story. But I want to hear your take and your response and your add on to this, because I think the design thing is largely a trope. It's not real. I don't think you have to want to make stuff, you know, it's not, but I just entered design in a period where that's literally how every designer's TED Talk started. We're all makers. We're maker spaces. I just never felt that way. And I did feel like an outsider because for me, this is not about having something not exist and then exist and feel the joy of that. For me, it was much more about facilitating changes and transitions that need not have my mark on them, but simply because they're change that I know that I have the capacity to help and I think are worthwhile or at least match my values. You know, I'm not going to help accelerate change I don't agree with, but that's kind of the shift there. So that's partly why I don't know if I am a designer now. I think I'm a designer, but I think I'm trying to design transitions. So I don't know. Anyway, what's your
So I'm going to plus one that, yeah, the learning, what we're recording right now, just this, this all leaves an impact. You're absolutely a mark. I don't
You're
know, the
telling me
whole
I'm a
legacy
maker
thing.
and I am leaving a mark.
You know,
I don't believe you.
we are making right now. We are currently in the process of making.
This will disappear. Someday this will be gone.
It's
And it
okay.
doesn't,
Making
I
can
don't
be
mind
very
that.
personal, and I prefer to make things that maybe I just see, like the mandala that gets
I was
swept
just
off
going to say that.
when it's
We're
done,
totally
right?
walking right up to that other sticky that's in there
Right.
somewhere about the mandala.
It's
Yeah.
there. It's
I am
but like
so in, that is, yes. Yes.
that's perfectly fine. That is it is supposed to be a sort of, some stuff is better shared,
Mhm.
but I think I think what poisoned it for me was our sort of attention uh, crazed, voyeuristic social media world, where I just said, I'm checking out of all of that. I'm going to stop making things
Yeah.
for likes or permission. I'm going to make stuff that I find
Yeah.
fulfilling, and then it can go on a shelf in a place that
Yeah.
nobody else will ever see. So, still, I find that very, very
Yeah.
fulfilling. But the for the on the design side, I don't think of us. And you're right. It's like the introduction to me often was that, start with why am I forgetting his name? I'm always doing the word finding now. Steve Jobs.
Oh, yeah.
So Steve Jobs. He knows his thing. He's going to be the driver. He's got the vision. He's the one that expresses that vision. That was
Yeah.
the sort of myth of the maker.
Yeah.
And I think of us as designers more as being intentional and introducing catalysts,
Yeah.
so that it's not a white space,
Catalyst.
or so that it's not a non-accessible space whatsoever. It is adding those constraints that start to point things
Yeah.
towards a change or a making of a thing,
Yes.
either or. Yeah, some
Well,
sort
and
of intersection.
I also want to make sure, like, because I think you and I feel the same about this. Like, no shade on the designers who are like, I'm a maker. I like making
Right.
things. I like
Oh, yeah,
seeing
absolutely.
things out
We
in
need them.
that's not the same
Yeah.
as what you were describing earlier about doing it for
Right.
likes or whatever. I want there to be humans whose like personal passion and drive is to create the
Mm-hmm.
most intuitive and easy to use, items and experiences. And when I mean, like, take case in point, like the enshittification of everything around us just
Mm-hmm.
drives home how important design is in
Yep.
places, especially where no one is paying for it because it's not profitable. But like,
Right.
I definitely want making as design to be something that people are passionate about, but it was never my thing. And I do wonder, to an extent, how much of it is just a function of what your on ramp is. And when I moved from being a physics teacher to being a designer, it was moving through some rituals that had been established by people who thought of design in the school of like Herb Simon and his quote about anyone designs who seeks to change existing situations into preferred ones. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if that's the bedrock of like how you're thinking about design, that's very different from Steve Jobs or any of the other like kind of vaunted designers you might study. And there's room for all of it. There's room for all of it to be important,
Right.
but it does create, the plurality around definitions of design that create a lot of issues today. So, and I
Mm-hmm.
suspect, again, kind of pulling it back around, there's probably a lot of people who are finding themselves in this space right now, kind of feeling very similarly, that they go, okay, well, I got into such and such practice or domain or profession, but find myself feeling like it's less about the doing or the making of the thing in said profession, and it's more
Mm-hmm.
about facilitating some kind of second or third order change process within it.
Right.
And you start talking about that with people and they go change management, and then you just have to be like, I'll see you later. Like, okay, so
So
what's
this.
Myers-Briggs?
What about Myers-Briggs?
What is your Myers-Briggs type? We
Oh,
should make everybody share theirs on
oh.
the day that we do the live.
So I have a confession that I'll make here. I used to facilitate
Dude,
Myers-Briggs.
thank you for that confession. That kind of matches my level of like, I don't care about making. When I first told people that, like, I felt like I was literally gonna get kicked out of design. And then I had people
Mm,
who would tell me things like, I can't believe you're a designer. And I was like, but I this is good. Your confession matches mine in level of severity. So
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah. I'm now on the opposite end of that spectrum, but I got
Well,
sucked into it as like,
this gives you
this is
credibility
interesting.
because there have to be tons of people who are listening to this who either have or still do find themselves gravitating towards any number of personality frameworks. And I think we've talked about publicly, I think people have heard me say, I continue to love all of those. They're all garbage. None of them
Sure.
have evidence. That's not true. So like the big five ocean, like there's an evidence base there. But for the most part, using things like Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram or like DISC,
Right.
these are all
Horoscope,
garbage. So
Chinese birth year,
despite
whatever that
that,
is. Oh,
as we've
right.
talked about, like corporate astrology, if they are giving people language and it's useful, there are ways for these things to be useful, but are they what people claim and use them to be? No. So I love this. I love hearing. I don't think I knew this, Kyle, that you facilitate this.
Yeah, I did. And um it was interesting. What I think I got from it more so when I was finally starting to get to the edge of it, before I realized, oh, there's no science in this whatsoever. It's just a closed circuit sort of product
Did you
that
read that book
was unleashed.
that came out
Uh,
about the
I
woman who
I
invented it?
did it, and it just for some reason, like I was so focused on other
We're
things
like, I
that
don't care. This is it.
I wasn't the analyst then trying to like debunk this thing. I was like, oh, look, a new thing, shiny object, and I was in an environment where people just were tearing each other's hair out all the time, and I was like, I got to do something to put people in their corners
Yeah.
and try to make people understand each other or help people understand each other a little bit better.
Yeah.
And that it was less about sitting down and saying you are this and you are that. I think the lessons that we got from it was there are people that approach things in different ways, and these are some examples of what that looks like, and that made people step back a little bit. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It also, and again, this probably doesn't have the grounding that it should scientifically, but the organization was also like, here are the like 3 or 4 most tenured leaders in this organization. They are this particular type, and 70% of the rest of the organization looks that way. What does that tell you about our organization? And that's the right message, probably the wrong way to get there, but it got people thinking about, aha, that's why we're stuck in this INTP sort of we can't change our way out of things kind of thing. We're Seinfeld, just why can't people
I've never thought about it this way, but like what you just mentioned is like the instinct is to see either the pattern or the anomaly, without the words or the tools to engage in some other form of sense making. I think about like a sense maker collector that would show, here's where this hot spot or this anomaly is.
Yeah.
In some ways, I suspect organizations don't realize is what they're hunting for, but they want to get a sense or a feel for like, we're a cluster of this or we're a cluster of that, or these people think differently because of X, and where it runs into a wall is not necessarily the overall problem with the framework, but it's that the number or the people in your org who are going to be outliers because of the perspective they have isn't the same people every time. It's context dependent. So it isn't going to always be the INTPs. On this matter, it's going to be this particular group of people we should really listen to because they see something none of us are seeing. On this other matter, it might be a completely different group. That's where I think those break down. But I've never thought about an org, kind of instinctively hunting that via personality framework. But totally.
I don't know that that's what they were hunting for so much as that's what I was shoving on them, because it didn't. Me making a list of people and saying this is the INTP group, give them the heads down spreadsheet work, and these ENTPs send them out and have them do all the sales. That was even reading the book and being a facilitator. None of that interested me at all. It was the wider pattern of relationships within that group. But you're absolutely right, and I've never gone in and thought this might be an org that wants a Myers-Briggs or a 5 strengths, but instead try these other sense-making things that allow people to define themselves rather than fit into these
oh my God, yeah. I mean,
BS
we would
categories.
not ever at this point recommend it. But I almost feel like if I were to ever encounter an organization where they had implemented some kind of personality framework, like testing for everybody, it does occur to me that you could almost kind of listen for that instinct, even if they don't see it for themselves. And you could link some of that over, not link like the actual personality results. The times I've encountered this in client organizations have always been a total, you know what, Like I've
Yeah.
met people who introduce themselves and they're like, I'm red, so I don't want introductions and small talk. She's orange. She always wants to hear about the weather. So, give her your small talk.
Oh,
I don't know, I might be got the colors right. I don't know. I'm just making that up. But
no, you're digging up. This is how big
fair
organizations
warning.
absolutely work. So when I was at Circuit City, in our email signature, we wrote our 5 strengths. People on their office doors had their name and their 5 strengths printed underneath them. And when Circuit went under, and a lot of people here in Richmond went to Capital One, we started doing that again, and it was sort of I am identifying you as being part of the alumni, part of the sort of refugees
It was a
of
signal
Circuit.
of
So
something
now
else.
we're
Yeah.
finding exactly, but
Mhm.
and then at Capital One, we had the 4 quadrants, the 4 colors, the red,
That's good.
yellow,
Yeah.
green, blue. Personalysis, that's what it
Yeah.
is. And they printed it the same size as our access badges, and we kept them on our key fob for our, like, so I can walk into a room and then I can show this to everybody. It's that accessible. I need to get in the building and I need to show everybody my personalysis.
See, when it's mandated in that way and it's like systematized in that way, it just makes me so itchy. I mean, obviously we know that's part of the challenge with all this. But like, for example, I've encountered people inside orgs who their org hasn't done any of this, as a programmatic thing. But, they've taken a test and they choose to put their little, like, I'm an INTP or I'm a this or that.
Right.
And those are the situations where I'm like, clearly there's something about that description of that personality style that resonates for you. Even if, yeah, Myers-Briggs, you could take that test 6 months apart and get different results. Even if Enneagram is, who knows what Enneagram is based on. That's my personal favorite. It's the first one I encountered when I was like young. So, big ups to the Enneagram. I don't get the new age Christian stuff with it these days, but we'll leave that for another time. But like, if somebody's like, I'm a 7 with an 8 wing, nobody else here has done this test, but like you're choosing, that's to me, like that's a very reasonable way for a human to want to broadcast something about who they are to other people, even if the framework in which it is, planted is suspect, in much the same way that like I might introduce anything else about me in this community. People know me as this kind of person in this community over here, and I might want to signal that I'm this kind of person when I'm with my friends who like the music I like. I might want to signal that I'm this kind of person when I show up on the ice. Like there's definitely something about that I think sometimes gets thrown out, like baby with bathwater. And so I'm very open to someone who wants to tell me, I'm an INTP, I'm this way. But the minute that starts to solidify into a crystalline structure that then dictates and starts to warp your own story of yourself, you build up an immunity to change around it, and then you're in trouble. So
yeah. Oh, it's interesting because I remember the other thing that I would do is I would find movie characters, pretty popular ones, which unfortunately that only works if you grew up in the Western content sphere.
Yeah.
So you know who Luke Skywalker is. So I can say you're an INFP or whatever that was, and so is Luke. Luke is the I'm gonna change him. I'm committed no matter what. It's the and then Darth Vader is something else, and I don't know, but people could introduce themselves in that context within that group. And you're exactly right. Like the people didn't feel like they had the ability to sit down and say, I'm done peopling for the day. I just need to put my head down. Or you know what? I'm not concerned about how this thing works. I'm concerned about the ethics that are associated with it. And I'm immovable on it.
Yeah.
People didn't have that ability to sit there. But when they sat down and said, I'm going to be Luke Skywalker on this.
Yeah.
We got it. And there was this level of empathy for that. So it created this real enabling structure that was interesting.
It like, again, it kind of ritualizes an identity in a way that you can then have, the power to do something you wouldn't, in a different identity setting. And I think that is the part of it that I will respect, because if someone has chosen that as their armor or their persona or their mask for a reason, because it empowers a dynamic they can't access in their other identity, then fine. That's important data for me to have in a collaborative setting. That's actually one of the reasons that, like, the Enneagram, out of all of them, I mean, again, caveat, like, we should make the words scroll across the top. Jen and Kyle,
we're not selling these things.
They're all garbage. They're all garbage.
Right.
But I'm
also a Leo. if that adds up, whatever that tells you.
I'm a Cancer, and any description I've ever read about Cancers has never felt accurate. And then I've had people tell me, well, that's because you're reading like the popular version of Cancer, but not the real version of Cancer. And I'm like, give me the real version then. we should figure out I also know my moon and my rising. I just don't remember them. Anyway, well, let's give people our birth date and times and let them go run our charts and come back on the live
Yes.
setting.
Yeah, they can go build a whole dossier on our personality
It'll
and
explain
where
a
we'll
lot.
be.
It'll explain a lot,
Yeah.
guys. The Enneagram, though, this may be true about other ones. I just don't know them as well. I encountered the Enneagram in like 6th grade. And I, voraciously read like all 4 books I could find at Walden Books about it. Because you're in 6th grade. You are literally like, who the fuck am I? You're going through schismogenesis as an adolescent, figuring out who you are in contrast to the people that raised you. And, so I was just voraciously interested in how people worked and psychology and stuff. And so I just found it interesting. I didn't take any of it as gospel even at that age. But, the books I read were well before it kind of started to feel the way it does now. But one of the things I appreciated was the books I read were very adamant that this is not something you take a test, that somebody tells you what you are. That's not how this works. This is something where you read what this framework says about each of these numbers. And you, in reading them, will encounter one that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck because you've never felt so seen before. And they don't say it in that kind of extreme language, but that was my experience. So, and as a 6th grader reading about that and reading like type 5, I was like, oh. Now, if I read about type 5 now, as a 44-year-old, there's definitely stuff I'm like, nah, that's not me anymore. Enneagram people would say it's because you've integrated and grown and pulled in, because the Enneagram's all about how like you work your way around and like some perfectly like activated person would be drawing on all 9 types or whatever. But I just appreciate that bit too, which is when a framework is being applied such that you are taking a test and being told what you are based on your answers, a very different dynamic than I, as an individual, have pursued an understanding of this framework and I see myself represented in it. So I like aligning myself with this particular description that somebody else has made because it's the closest that I've ever felt seen or described by someone else. Those are 2 very different dynamics, which I think people don't really talk much about. And maybe they don't need to because we don't really need to defend that entire industry, but it is something.
Yeah. If I'm hearing you right, and this is the first time I've really thought about it this way, it is less of a now I understand myself and more about here's where I fit into the schema.
I think that. Well, it's probably both. I mean, I wouldn't say it's more versus one, but yeah, I think it's both. I think the latter is key to this.
Yeah. And again, that's something that's...
Even as a kid, I was never going to be like, I'm a 5. Will everyone please learn about the Enneagram so that you understand me? And I did.
I don't know the Enneagram
like
very well.
my parallel to your confession about Myers-Briggs is this bit about the Enneagram. Like I learned about it and I knew the other types and I had a couple friends who were also into it. So we were like, oh, you're such a 6, you're such a 5. But we were really gentle about it because we were like 12. And then I would get to know people at school or I'd have other people in my life and I would do exactly what you're never supposed to do, which is like kind of type somebody. And I would never talk to them. I would never be like, you're an 8. You know what I mean? Like unless they were into it. But I, in my own mind, felt it was helpful because I was like, I wonder if the reason they're treating me this way is because they're this other number that has these motivations. Who cares? The assumptions would have been wrong no matter what. But the point was, it got me thinking, they're not like me. So it's reasonable that they're operating on different principles. They're operating on different values. That alone was really important. So I feel like if you're going to learn about a personality framework, you got to do it when you're like 11 or 12, and you shouldn't be allowed to do it again as an adult.
Well, and so I facilitated it enough with orgs for a long enough period of time where I saw big shifts. And they're like, well, you if you take it theoretically, if you take it 3 or 4 times, you're going to get the same results every time. Bullshit. I've seen in 3 years people have different results. I've taken it myself multiple times. It has so much more to do with context, of course, but like where you're going to be performative, what values are in the organization, how you want to be seen, that kind of stuff. Like we know how to game those sort of things. But I would have never imagined that we would have spent 20 minutes talking about corporate horoscopes in this. But I think it's landing for me is this is so much of that translation of like, this is the stuff that's popular. This is the stuff people are asking for and they refer to, and it's embedded in an identity in an organization so much that we had it on our office doors and our what's called that, our badges. How do we
pineapples on their door or whatever? Just
right.
The way,
yeah.
Like, hi. I want to sort of subtly signal something that I can't say out loud. In some cases, because of cultural norms, but also because I don't know how to articulate it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, we can't walk into these spaces and go, well, that's bullshit. You've been
Yeah.
lied to this whole time. This whole corporate identity, this whole social identity that you have
Yeah.
shared with all these people, you've all been lied to, and it's all
Yeah.
bullshit. We can't, we have to swim with that current.
Yeah.
And so this sort of, again, we're at the airport and we're watching what's important to everybody.
Yeah.
It's all right. So there's something meaningful about finding a place here. How do we find that in another way? How do we offer something that might be more accessible in the whatever context we're actually dealing with?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I needed. Again, I needed to learn this the hard way pretty often. Was I'm learning about all the bullshit we're doing, and now I want to go call it. Oh, that doesn't.
Yeah.
Calling it, naming it doesn't always do it. It's so much better to introduce something adjacent and slight and have somebody else go, wait a second, is Myers-Briggs bullshit? It might just be. You
Yeah.
might be onto something there.
You said it, not me.
Run with it, friend. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what this is reminding me of? Can you guess? Like our recent conversations about music. And I wonder,
Ah,
I don't know. I mean, depending on how much longer we want to spend today, I can stick around
I've,
for a while still
I've
here.
got time. Yeah.
So, and this will be for those of you who
Constant.
stay with us in future iterations. I'm sure this will come up a lot, but because we're going to give ourselves permission to go way more off topic. But there's
Mm-hmm.
so Kyle and I have talked at length in the past about music and relatedly, books and other forms of art and media, and like recommendations and the nature of what you like and how it's described, and like if you like this, you might also like this. And so what you were just saying kind of reminded me
Yeah.
of this nature of, so just to try to put it plainly, say someone goes, okay, I like this band, they are a genre, they are prog metal, for example.
Mm-hmm. Right.
um, and then others, whether another human or an algorithm, will go,
Mm-hmm.
you like this band, they are tagged as prog metal, here are some other prog metal bands, and like in theory you might also like those, but you also might not. And I have
Mm-hmm.
this experience very frequently where I don't. And there was a conversation Kyle and I were even having the other day about metal and prog
Mm-hmm.
metal, and I kind of came to
Uh-huh.
the realization that despite the fact that I like prog rock, progressive music, rock, etc., and other forms of music that have components or structures that would make them progressive, we'll spare for
Mm-hmm.
those who don't care what that all is. But I realize I don't like prog metal as a genre, even though I like other metal that pulls on prog-ish things. So how do I put that into Spotify? How do I get Netflix to recommend me the movies that aren't literally the same as the other movies I like, but have these other far more subtle, far more tacit, far more like they can't be made explicit. Therefore, the
Mm-hmm.
system can't work with it, which, again, we get
Yeah.
to the tyranny of the explicit and AI and all of that. So I don't know. What does that spark for you? I have more thoughts, but I was like, man, it took me
So many things, and I think there's an interesting art there, and this is one of those places where when you find people that kind of get this. There are so many people I talk to about music and like, making recommendations, and they're kind of at a loss. Like I don't know how to. Either I don't know how to intersect with where you are, or I don't know how to relate what you're interested in to another thing.
Mhm.
And that's fine. But then you can kind of find the music nerd in the crowd
Yeah.
who's like, oh, then you're gonna like these five other things. Have you ever heard this? And then this, and then did you know that other person produced this thing and they played bass on that other album? And you're just down the rabbit hole
Yeah.
immediately. Before you know, it's 2 o'clock in the
Adjacent
morning. You've
possibles
chased down
and
something.
lily pads and whatever
Exactly.
metaphors you want. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But and as much as I have always despised the Jack Black in High Fidelity, the pretentious sort of gatekeeper of music. Like that's he's there. I worked with uh, an office full of those people when I worked at Dutch East India, and I was working in music distribution and running a record label, and um, that's he nailed it. That is the sense of it. But
Yeah.
there isn't a rhyme or reason that we have come up with, I think, that categorizes things like music very well. And I don't want there to be necessarily.
No.
I've started playing with something recently. My record collection is probably at about 4,500 records. Everything's digitized now, and so, you know what? When I talk to the old school nerds, they're
That
like,
number
"Oh,
really big on the screen when you said
do it." Put a, like something over my head or something too. The old school nerds that I used to work with to be like, well, that's you're just getting started. It's
middling.
okay.
Yeah.
Like, don't be too hard on yourself. 4,500 albums, so it's still kind of whatever. It's been a thing since I still have my Emerson, Lake and Palmer's greatest hits record
Yeah.
in here that I pulled out of my folks' collection when I was a kid. So like this has been a lifelong
Yeah.
endeavor, but putting everything, digitizing everything, and then trying to make 4,500 albums accessible where you can just have a couple mouse clicks and pull it up.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like record stores. Where record stores, you have the rock and you've got the pop and you've got the metal and you've got the hip hop section and maybe jazz and classical and that kind of stuff. It doesn't like that doesn't, nobody sits down, I don't find, and just says, I'm in the mood for some rock right now.
Yeah.
That absolutely doesn't cover anything. And so I've been throwing a ton of metadata in there.
For whom that is something.
Maybe. Yeah, I suppose.
I do meet people from time to time for whom, they grow up listening to almost nothing with guitars in it. So then to say rock could be meaningful because it's such a departure from what they listen to. But I digress. You continue.
Well, no, it's all contextual because I say classical, and
they would
when
be
you
the
get
opposite. They would be like, "What is classical? That means nothing. That's so broad. Get out of here." Yeah.
Yeah, you get into the like hardcore classical world, and they're talking about like specific recordings and what key and all sorts of stuff that is way over it's a level of engagement that I don't have with classical music so much as I go, throw on Schubert. I like Schubert, and that's fine. We'll leave it at like I wouldn't be able to pick out Schubert from anyone else necessarily unless I was staring at the name.
Like Classical Thunder, like the songs that are very recognizable because they're in all the movies.
Those like Time Life collections that they would sell on commercials.
This is like I'll let you finish, but like I'm thinking about transdisciplinary, like thinking here. But finish your thought, unless there was no more.
Well, and we'll go to metal too. Like we could sit down and ring out 100 different genre sort of oddities of just smashing words together, and it would make if I said prog post-death doom or something like that. It sounds absurd, but okay, I get a good sense of where that is. Anyone else that's not embedded in this is going,
and it's like your Starbucks drink order. You start adding all of these modifiers and modifiers and modifiers, and the order matters and da-da-da-da. I think that I find these kind of talks so interesting because on the surface, it feels like talking about music, or we could do all of this with books or authors. We could do this with movies, right? Like, it feels so separate and just like this is a casual social chat from like talking about complexity or any kind of like the practices we're talking about. But to me, they are just on top of each other. Even talking about your, when you digitized your library and thinking about like, how might you tag or organize these things? I start to think immediately, this is some of my design origins around the information architecture. But then you're faced with the notion of an information architecture that follows the metaphors of architecture, like a building, like a library that is arranged, with like either a Dewey Decimal System or the Library of Congress system or whatever, that is static. Versus like, a forest where things just grow. And over here, you've got like a little, thicket that is just teeming with certain things, but then a seed makes its way over there. And now it actually makes sense that there's some other variation on that shrub over here. And it's supporting these, whatever. So there's this, there are these like conflicting metaphors for the information architecture of what you're talking about that to me are just 100% parallel with dealing with complex systems and dealing with human collaboration that has all of this at work as well, because you can engage with somebody and think, even if you're using words out loud, that you're operating on the same understanding, but the taxonomy in which all of it is
Mm-hmm.
taking place is different for you than it is for someone else. And I'll give you this example because it adds on to what we're talking about. And we talked in the live session a little bit before we started about bands and things. So this, I can't remember if it made it onto the recording or not, but everyone's going to think I literally only listen to Rush and I literally only read Cormac McCarthy, which is not the case. But Cormac McCarthy is such a good example for this, because if you've never read anything by Cormac McCarthy, just know this. He has a certain writing style where he does not use much punctuation, and he does not bother to put things like quotation marks around dialogue. And at first, when you're reading it, you're like, oh, this is kind of weird. I'm having a hard time kind of making sense. Very quickly, you adjust and you realize you never needed it. You hear the different characters' voices, no problem whatsoever. And he's got some like very eloquent quotes about like, I don't like using unnecessary punctuation. I think most of it's unnecessary. I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, motherfucker. So into it, right? Okay, so that's one thing about Cormac McCarthy to know. Another is that not all, but a good number of his books involve West or Southwest regions. I wouldn't say he writes about like the white male cowboy, even though I think some people sort of reduce him to that. That's a gross, to me, like oversimplification. But there is like a common sort of aspect of his work that is like the Western. And then finally, he is writing it in a way that is not, people often talk about, certain like genre fiction is more plot driven and literary fiction is more like character development driven. I mean, certainly he's more in the latter, but I often think his work is neither plot nor character driven. It's just this like existential stuff that it just, there's more there that is neither of those things. Okay, that's three things I just described. There is this common trope that seems to happen in worlds of people who are into his writing. People get into his writing and they go, I want more recommendations for stuff like Cormac McCarthy. And they show up in a Reddit subforum and they ask that question. And you will get three different streams of recommendations. You will get other authors who write with no punctuation, despite the fact that the content of their work is wildly different and has nothing to do at all with what Cormac McCarthy writes about. You will get recommendations that are Westerns, that are not at all written like Cormac McCarthy writes. And then you will get recommendations of people who, in my appreciation of Cormac McCarthy, are going to be hitting the same kind of themes, making you question your entire existence. Like, the experience I have, those things hit. But there are people who come in wanting like more Westerns, and those recommendations hit for them. And I think everything I've just described is true for obviously other forms of media, other forms of experience, but it also poses the challenge for us we are trying to mediate things in our practice. We are trying to create conditions. We are trying to mediate and to some extent stimulate interactions. We have a responsibility to knowing that there is the possibility for that kind of thing to be happening at every node of every part of every network we're in.
Yeah. And it's important to note too that that's not a it's not a diagnosis. That is that's the examination that happens for everybody that's involved in that conversation.
Right.
Because saying our conversation before around prog metal. Do you like Opeth? No, but let me think about why not and why you would assume that. That is the sense making that is happening.
Yeah,
in that
we should base our entire Slack conversation about some of those bands. But yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the responsibility isn't to get to the answer. It's just to provoke that conversation. And just again, it's going to be shifting.
Yeah, just to acknowledge that is how it works, or that possibility and that like plurality of the meaning and the sense making to be had is not centered in one brain or in one true, accurate assessment. There isn't one. And that, I think, alone is like, if that does this to anybody, like finally, you're in the club, like I doubt anybody listening to this is going to have their mind blown by that. They're already on board generally, but I think that's really critical. And so seeing that as sort of an important aspect of any kind of complexity sort of informed work, I think is really important.
And let's zoom that out of the music itself in the context that we meet that music, that intersection of, this is the person that recommended it to me. Well, I don't like what that person recommends.
This person always recommends stuff to me that misses it, so forget it.
Yeah. Or this person, I love what they've got going on. I'm so curious about what there's coming out of their collection. And so give me something. I'm eager to listen to it. Or I don't know. There's something I didn't like for a long time, and then I'm watching a movie and I'm really into it, and it shows up on the soundtrack. shit, what is that? And I have to get it. And I find out like it's, if I ever find out that I like a Counting Crows song, that will be the end of me. That, but like that's the sort of thing that I get caught off guard with all the time. Like, what? I don't like them. I've never liked
Everybody
them. Why would
listening
I?
right now, it is our collective mission to find out what Counting Crows song Kyle might actually. I can't help you because I don't like them either. But
Yeah, it to me, I kind of go blood rage when I hear it coming
okay,
over
you know.
the.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. So here's something that
So.
I'm thinking about as we talk about this, though. This is
Mhm.
all working on the assumption that you and I are engaging with music in a pretty meaningful way. You know, there are plenty of people for whom music's just like not a big deal. There are people who don't read. I don't mean like there aren't people like book reading. Like I just mean for some people they
Mhm.
don't listen to a lot of you don't read a lot of
I
books.
don't read. I can't read a lot.
Yeah, I know you. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
one of those.
Yeah.
You know, but there's something, movies, podcasts, or something else entirely. The sports that you follow, the things that you might try as activities or hobbies, and what you might then pursue sort of as offshoots of those things. I think there's a difference and I liked the example that you gave of like, well, this person recommended it, so I feel this way about it. That's different. What we're talking about here to me feels different than when people make something their entire identity and it's part of indicating who they are and what tribe or social in-group they're part of. And if somebody important who holds some level of authority or other status in that group likes a thing, then I should probably like it too. All of that happens, and that happens with
Mhm.
music and with all the things we're talking
Sure.
about. But that's not the dynamic we're talking about here, right? We're talking about the actual personal meaning and sense making that we might
Right.
engage with in this type of content. And so I just wanted to call that out because I know there's probably some people who are like, I don't get into music the way you guys do, so I don't get it. But there's got to be other things for whom we're talking about the stuff that makes you
Exactly. Yeah, and this is the going back to the I'm a disruptor. I want change, and then you showing up and going, oh yeah, well do you like Opeth? I'm like, no, not at all. Well, how does that not make? It doesn't make sense to me. And there being that block there, but if you can acknowledge all of the things that need to sort of orchestrate themselves
Yeah.
for a thing to be a thing in that moment. It has to make sense.
Yeah,
But,
this is an interesting one too, this example with Opeth and like other bands. So these are bands that, I mentioned earlier. I like different types of metal, but there's also certain things that, like Kyle's describing, given what you know about me and my tastes, someone might anticipate I also enjoy this other thing. And I actually have this experience really frequently where somebody with knowledge of anything, a medium, a genre, anticipates that I like something and they don't, and I don't. And I actually
mhm.
wonder if that experience is something, if that's anything. Am I alone in this, or is this something that people experience? Because this happens with TV a lot too.
Oh yeah.
There aren't a lot of TV shows, modern TV shows, that I really get into, and almost everybody I know at this point, my friends they don't even try to recommend things because even when they have, and I've given things an honest go, they just don't grab me. But once in a blue
Mhm.
moon, something does, and it just for whatever reason, everyone's always like shocked, and I couldn't tell you why, and I can't help. Where music's a little easier to kind of figure out, like, well, this genre tag is used in this way, but you say this, but it's this with these influences, and it gets into more nuance. So do
Mhm.
you have that with things, with anything? Like,
All day.
nobody recommends
Uh,
me anymore because everyone's like, you're not going to like what I recommend. I'm like, okay.
my recommendations I get now are more snarky, because of that sort of thing. Like, here, you're probably, this is exactly the music that you listen to, but you're not going to like it because, and there's a dismissal that comes with that too, because you're a contrarian, or because you're not going to take my recommendation. It
Mm,
gets personal with some
yeah,
of them as well, and I don't think anyone's like agitated. All of my music nerd friends are like very opinionated and very
yeah,
just
they get it.
we're, me included, and we're
Yeah,
all like push hard on that sort of stuff, and so we
yeah.
push on each other a lot. Like, but there is a dismissal that
Mm,
when you take this out of the music context, and somebody sits down and says, like, I want change, I want collaboration, I like working with people,
yeah,
and then they don't, and they go, I don't think you know what you're talking about. I don't think you really understand yourself. Well, it's
yeah,
not one thing.
yeah,
I can't. Maybe I don't know how to name it, but I'm doing the best I can by saying, I think I
yeah,
want this thing. And I maybe in 5 other contexts or occasions or events, I'm all in. But
yeah.
today, I'm not in the mood to collaborate with
You know,
anybody. Put me headphones on.
it puts so much an onus too on the person when you really expect them to be able to articulate, right? We talked about this when we were talking about the dentist. Like, it's a good
Mm-hmm.
example, but there are definitely scenarios where you wouldn't know how to answer that question. One time I got an MRI and
Mm-hmm.
they asked me, they're like, we're going to give you headphones to distract you from the noises.
Right.
And I was like, I don't actually care. I'm not claustrophobic. And they were like, tell us
Mm-hmm.
what kind of music you want to listen to. And I was like, I don't want to listen to music. But nonetheless, I was being asked to anticipate what I was going to need, and I had no clue what I was going
Yeah.
to need, and it wasn't whatever. And I think there is that happening in all of the things we're talking about here, which is it does put an onus on someone to be able to explicitly articulate something that they may not have the ability to, or that may not be something that is possible to be explicitly articulated. And so when someone's like, what kind of music do you like, Jen? I have to answer that differently for every person that asks. But even if someone
Mm-hmm.
who knows all the subgenres of death metal knows, I still struggle because I'm not going to say I like blackened death metal because there's a lot that I don't like. And then I'm stuck
Right.
listing literally every band I like, but not these bands I don't like. And then forget it. So instead, it's kind of just I don't try. But like the alternative would be if we think about what we do in our practices, I don't ask humans to explicitly tell me their needs or
Mm-hmm.
explicitly paint the picture of the ideal future they want. I help them just obliquely say more of this, less of that. This thing was I'd like to see more aspects of this, but not this piece of it, and it's giving people that ability. Like if you played for me 3 songs for 30 seconds
Mm-hmm.
and I'd be like, this one, not those two, and it's less explicit and it is
Right.
avoiding again that phrase, tyranny of the explicit or whatever. I think Snowden's the one who I've heard talk about that so much, but he's not
Yeah.
the originator, but you get it. So it's like that is such
Yeah.
an ever-present kind of challenge. So for anyone listening, I'm thinking about like where in your work are you putting an unfair expectation or responsibility or onus on someone to be able to explicitly articulate something that they either can't or that
Mm-hmm.
nobody can reasonably be expected to? And how can you provide them some better ways to more obliquely share or indicate or be part of co-creating, the thing that would be an improved version of whatever?
Yeah. Pull out of the explicit needs and even go to categories which have an assumption of
Yeah.
being universal and understood. Because how many conversations then do you get into where you say I like black and death metal and they go, well, how about some Satyricon? You go, that's not black and death metal, that's not what I'm talking about. They're like, what are you talking? Of course it's black and death
Everybody's
metal. Like,
still listening. We've lost them. We've absolutely
yeah,
lost them. Next thing is
exactly.
we need to make our Spotify
Take,
playlist.
that's it. I was just thinking that we'll share this afterwards. This is what we meant. This is Russian Satyricon and Opeth.
Yes.
And but like then that's the next iteration of the music nerd argument of
Yes.
what category we're trying to put things in,
Yes.
only to come up with a stalemate in the
Yep.
end. And I really started doing this examination of my own uh, collection and how I wanted to add metadata to it so I could have it relationally
Yeah.
accessible. This is the music I want to listen to at dinner. 9 times out of 10. Sometimes at dinner I want to listen to something out of control, but right now,
Yeah.
like dinner music is sort of it has a thing that I
Yeah.
can't necessarily name, but I
Yeah.
can build I can add a tag to it
Yeah.
and
It's
build metadata
meaningful for
around.
you. It's meaningful.
That's it.
Yeah.
But now we're getting to like I'm the only interpreter of
That's
this,
right.
maybe my
Because
wife
I
as
don't have
well.
a dinner music category.
Yes,
No.
yeah, and if my dinner music was full of like pre-50s jazz,
Yeah.
you might go, that's not my dinner music at all. I can't stand jazz. The sound of a
Yeah.
saxophone makes my hair stand up. And I know those people too. And
Yeah.
so, but then when you get into like information architecture in larger organizations, this is what I was working on was a content management system around risk and process and compliance,
Yeah.
where people are approaching it from very different levels of expertise, very
Yes.
different domains in their careers, level of their career interactions with the process and organization as a whole. And the question was, how do we aggregate all of this at an
Yeah.
enterprise level so that we can all read it? And of course, it was, what's the taxonomy that we need? And what's the sort of user front end so that we can not allow people to stray? And when I came back to them and said, it's about as loose as you could possibly imagine, where you ask people
Yeah.
what they're observing, and you allow people to bring that into their own context, maybe find some keywords and phrases
Yep.
within those so that you
Yep.
can say there's a relationship here.
Yep.
Multiple people are describing a thing in a similar way, but it can't be a one-to-one relationship in those
Absolutely.
descriptions.
Yeah.
We need to see the web, and the web can't also be conclusive like a LLM and
That's
say,
right.
I found the answer.
Yeah.
Instead, it needs to like throw you the star map a little bit, and
Yep.
then you need to poke and be the human in there trying to make sense of it.
It's funny because I did a project that sounds almost identical to this when I was at MadPow. I won't get into it, but
Nice.
it's funny that like this, and I bet there are some people listening who would be like, "My God, I did the same thing." You know, the information architect type folks out there are like, yes. I love that, and I feel like that might be a good place to wrap. Partly because I have to run in a minute, but also just because it was a good, elegant.
We'll come back to music later.
Oh my
There'll
God,
be plenty of
there's gonna
time
be
for
a lot
music.
more.
Yeah.
There's gonna be a lot.
Yeah.
So just to say quickly, and then we can always add something later if we need to add some bookends to either of these. But I feel like that was a good. We've covered a lot. We've covered a good chunk of things. So, maybe this will be where we show this to the world, and then if you're still listening at the end of something, hopefully you're joining us in the next live session that we're going to try to plan. Or if you're listening to this someday down the road in the future, then hello from the past. So anyway,
that's right. Complexity Lounge at on meetup.com, and we'll pick it up from there. Love the interaction that we got in that first one, and so hopefully I want people to come in and saying to hear the questions I got from that rest of that session, because feeding off of everyone was great.
That's the goal.